also just want to let you all know that you can, if you have questions, raise your hand. We can kind of make this informal. It feels weird when I'm like talking at people, so feel free to participate. But yeah, like I said, here's just a little background on like what I studied. My undergrad was at the University of Pennsylvania, which is in Philadelphia. And I studied communication, sociology, and then, took some time and got to experience different kind of work environments, traveled, and ended up going to grad school in Seattle at the University of Washington, and then moved to Austin for a job with the city at the Austin History Center as an archivist. I'm born and raised, I was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, which is the southernmost tip of Texas on the border of Mexico. So Texas does feel like home. Yeah, let me give you some background about the Equity Office. We're fairly new, so we just started. Our office was established in 2016. And some of the stuff that was going on at the time was that Austin had just been, ranked as the best place to live in the nation. I don't know if you all have seen those reports, US News and World Reports. So we kind of like won this award, right, in like several years in a row. But at the same time, we were also, based on data, we're also ranked the most economically segregated city of its size in the nation, right? So how are these two realities happening at the same time, right? Best place to live in the nation, but we're also the most economically segregated. So it makes you ask the question, like, well, who are we the best place for? Which people are really benefiting from being the best place in the nation to live? So those were conversations that were happening. We had some grassroots organizations, communities of color united for racial justice. It's like a coalition of community organizations who were really pushing the city to do better because there are disparities across all quality of life outcomes, particularly around health, income inequality. Like our maternal infant health outcomes for Black women was really, really bad. It was the worst in the state of Texas, even though we're like this liberal, wealthy city. So and all of this was sort of by race, right? So there's disparities across race, across every outcome. Education, for poverty, we are Black and brown children, over 50% of Black children and 30% of Latinx children are living in poverty as compared to 5% of white children. And so that's a really huge gap, right? And so we really want to investigate like what's going on there, what are the root causes for that? And so it was really because of community organizations that the Equity Office even exists. It wasn't like our city leaders were like, oh, we see some problems, we're going to try to fix it. No, it wasn't really like that. It was really outside community organizations pushing for that accountability. So yeah, 2016 comes around. My boss, Brian, is hired. Brian Oakes, he's our chief equity officer. And he really worked with the community organizations who wanted this to happen in the first place. So we defined equity together as a city entity and as a community organization. We really co-created that. And we created a tool. The tool itself is used in every city department. It's really kind of investigating both internal practices within the city and the department, and also external data, right? The outcomes that we see out in the community, whether it's around housing, homelessness, transportation, all of the things, right? And so I'm going through this background quickly because I know you all aren't from Austin, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. I just think it's really important, how we came to be. But I do want to let you all know the definition that we use. We think it's important that even if you don't agree with this definition, whatever organizing you're doing in your own cities or in your own organizations, it's important that you're all working from the same shared language and the same definition. So for us in Austin, our definition of racial equity is both a process and an outcome when race no longer predicts a person's quality of life outcomes. So basically what that means is, like, if you go to every system, like the education system, you won't be able to predict a child's success based on their race. Right now, we can do that. Right now, we can predict, like, whether or not you're most likely to live in poverty, whether or not you're most likely to have multiple health issues. We can guess we can predict what your life expectancy is based on where you live. And where you live is very directly tied to race. We can predict what the air quality is in that community. So all of those things are really tied closely to race. And so for us, once we get to that place when we can no longer predict a person's quality of life, health outcomes, or any kind of outcomes based on race, then that means we know that we're in a different place now, in a place where we don't have to live like that, where race in the US isn't determining our stability and how well or not we thrive. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between equality and equity. Maybe that's something you all have talked about before. Based on these images, anyone in the group want to give a go at describing the differences between equality and equity?
I can try to explain it. I really love this picture because when I was starting to learn it, it was really difficult to visualize what equity really meant. So equality is giving people all the same tools to succeed. Everyone gets the same thing. That's equality. But equity is allocating tools to people who need it to be able to succeed. So on this first picture here for the baseball game, you're giving them all a box to stand on, but they don't all need just one box. In the equity picture, you're giving the last person on the yellow 2 boxes that they're able to see and they're able to succeed. So basically the difference is allocating resources that are needed instead of equally giving everyone something that they maybe don't need.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, you said it. Couldn't say it better. And so that's sort of, we're in the business, right, of trying to identify where the gaps are and how we kind of fill in those gaps. Really hard work, right? Because of history, we have hundreds and hundreds of history of leading us up to where we're at now, to where these gaps are. We also include justice because justice is actually like removing the barriers altogether. And that's the vision and the dream. I would argue we're not even at equality yet. So that's just like the long-term dream and vision. But we kind of use these visuals, I think, because it kind of helps, kind of paint a picture, give a visualization of what we're trying to do in this work. Let's see, so someone put something in the, what if someone doesn't work as hard as someone else? They both receive the same privileges, even though one person tries way harder. I think that also talks a bit to racialized capitalism too. We're kind of tying people's worth to their productivity. And I don't know if we should be doing that. So that's what I would say to that. And I do think privileges and people working hard are very different. Privileges are often things that we're born with or don't necessarily have a ton of control over. Working hard doesn't necessarily equate having privileges either. All right, I also wanted to talk a little bit about our framework that we use at the Equity Office. These things, these 3 components that kind of form this circle are kind of how we approach work in general. This normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing. And I think you can apply this to a bunch of different scenarios. It's really like an organizing strategy. So normalizing is kind of what we're doing right now. It's where you're developing a shared analysis. You're talking about, well, I'm talking, but in a perfect world, we would both be exchanging information, right? And kind of building definitions together, kind of looking at root causes together, going through history together. Organizing is really about building those partnerships. So it's building your internal capacity. So building your own anti-racist muscle, like as a group and as individuals, but also how you partner with other groups, whether it's internally or with community organizations to achieve something, right? Or to define a problem. Operationalizing is when you start actually implementing the strategies that you come up with together in your organizing. And we keep it in a circle because it's a cyclical process, right? Where it's not linear. It's not like, or there's not a hierarchy to these steps either. You don't always go 1, 2, 3. It's like sometimes you stay in one, the normalizing piece, for a very long time. Because people are at different places in their journey, right? Into understanding this kind of work, which is great, it's good. But if you're going to move together as a group, you want to spend a lot of time kind of building that shared analysis together. Organizing, a lot of times you're doing normalizing and organizing at the same time. Like you kind of have to build the plane as you fly it sometimes. I'm sure y'all have heard that. If equity work, I mean, I think you've probably noticed equity as a concept is very trendy right now. I feel like you hear it everywhere. All these private companies are hiring equity folks to do the work. It's really trendy right now. So it's a new, I mean, I guess I would say that the theories that kind of go into this work aren't new, right? We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors who've done this work in their own way. But as a professionalized kind of concept, it's pretty new. And so I think collectively there's a lot of organizing happening because we need coalitions, right? And we need coalition building to get stuff done. So the city of Austin, like we work kind of closely with offices in Seattle and Portland who are doing similar work because we all need to learn from each other. But yeah, I wanted to share this framework because I think it's applicable to a lot of different instances. I think if you do these 3 things and revisit them throughout time, like this is how a lot of this work happens. And also understanding the data, knowing the data and then using it in how you approach problem solving is really important. And I would challenge y'all to maybe look at some of the outcomes and disparities in maybe San Diego County. I know that's huge, but I also know that there are huge disparities, right? I think I was doing a little like exploration online, and there are like these health disparity dashboards that the county has, and they don't look too different from what we see like here, honestly, by race. So in Austin, you'll kind of see this map on the right. We're kind of divided based on policy, practice, procedure, the history of that. We're kind of divided east-west. I think in San Diego County, would you all say it's a little bit more north-south divided economically and racially, maybe? Regardless, I think you'll notice that people of color are more likely to disproportionately have to work in low-paying jobs, maybe jobs that aren't as safe, more likely to be uninsured and live in medically vulnerable corridors, to live in food insecure areas, meaning that there isn't access to healthy, affordable, fresh produce and food, face the greatest challenges of housing costs and affordability, experience multiple chronic conditions, so like high blood pressure, diabetes, and also concentrated in zip codes with lower levels of life expectancy. And that, to me, I think when I first learned that, that was really startling to me, that in our city that is considered pretty wealthy, that there, depending what zip code you live in, your life expectancy could be lower. So the zip code I live in, for instance, it's majority people of color. Our life expectancy is 10 years less than on the west side in a majority white neighborhood. And if you think about it, you always want to ask yourself why, right? Like, you can try doing that exercise with every data point. You'd be like, well, why? Well, because all of our toxic industry is on this side of town. Well, why? Because of city policies from the 1950s and 1960s that concentrated landfills and polluting industry like gas tank farms, like on this side of town. So if you kind of start investigating, you sort of see it's not just by accident that this stuff has occurred, or it's not because people are lazy or not working hard enough or aren't trying. It's really by design that all of our major cities in this country, you see this pattern. And so I don't know if anyone happens to know any of the data points for where you all are, or for any of your hometowns, if you're not from that area in California, if you come across anything like this. Think about COVID-19. What have you heard about that in terms of disparate outcomes? I know someone's heard something.
I heard that African Americans are being affected much more by COVID.
Is that you, Jade? I don't think I can hear you.
Oh, hello. Oh, I was saying that African Americans, I heard that they're being more affected by COVID than any other race.
Yeah, so yes. And then you can kind of think about why that might be, right? So who's more likely to work in lower paying jobs where there aren't as many protections or where people are being taken advantage of? Who's working these frontline jobs? It's usually Black and Brown communities, right? Who's more likely to not get vaccinated, to choose not to get vaccinated? Most of the time due to access, misinformation, and or because of our history with the medical industrial complex and the kinds of terrible experimentation that the medical profession has done on communities of color. So there's all these reasons, all the factors that go into why we see some of these outcomes. But yeah, thanks, Jade. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things we've done as an office. So I'll say doing this work is hard, right? And you're not going to be able to shift the culture of an entire organization like the City of Austin, the government organization. There's about 15,000 people that work in that organization, and we've been around since 2016. So change has to happen incrementally, right? So some of the things that we've done in the past couple of years, because of the terrible health outcomes we were seeing related to COVID-19, we realized the thing that people were needing the most at this point in time because people were dying, and if they weren't dying, they were losing their jobs. We distributed direct cash assistance to families so that they could at least, pay rent or use it however they wanted. We didn't put a stipulation on how to use this money. We just knew people needed cash like in their hands. So we really relied a lot on our community partners because they're the ones who work directly with people on the ground. So we worked with them to distribute cash assistance. Other things we've done, we're also helping folks at the same time get naturalized because we have probably similar where y'all are at too. I mean, San Diego, very close to Mexico. So we have a really large immigrant population, and our governor right now is very anti-immigrant. And so we have been partnering with area organizations to help folks get naturalized. So working on, different education programs, but making them more accessible. Just kind of helping folks kind of navigate this really complex process of becoming a naturalized immigrant here in the States. We established the first immigrant affairs office that lives with the equity office for that same reason. We also work on like really big infrastructure projects. We're not city planners, I don't know all of the technical jargon that comes. I'm not an engineer, right? So, but I do know what happens to people when we do invest billions of dollars in huge infrastructure projects. On the surface, they can seem really great. So for instance, we have a big a public transportation project that's happening right now. And that's great because our bus system, we don't have a rail system. We're bringing that in. Our bus system isn't that great. So we're going to improve all that. But what also happens at the same time is when you invest that much money, it brings more investment into the city too. So developers are coming and buying up large chunks of land along these public transportation corridors to build these high-rise apartments. But you have to ask yourself who they're building them for. And often they're not building them with the interests of families in mind, with communities of color who are hanging on to their property that they've had for several generations. Property taxes raise exponentially. So it becomes really hard for people who don't make a lot of money or don't have a lot of money to be able to continue to live in these areas and take advantage of these great infrastructure projects that are coming, because often it becomes too expensive for them to live here. So we're involved in those kinds of conversations around, well, how do you kind of strategize around anti-displacement for folks who will face that displacement pressure when we bring in this beautiful fast rail system. And then some other things we have, we do these ongoing trainings. That's part of the normalizing piece, right? Building that kind of shared analysis together. It's called Undoing Racism Training, and it's led by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And that's a national organization that, you all could probably find an organization in your area that maybe has a relationship with PSAB, with the People's Institute. Highly recommend that training if you're ever able to take it. It's a 3-day training. It's pretty intensive, but it really helps, give you a framework to kind of work from when you're on your anti-racist journey. We also, the city, for claiming to be as LGBTQIA plus friendly as it is, we don't have a lot of data around the queer community. And so that was something that we kind of spearheaded as well. Spent over a year kind of collecting demographic information, getting, doing some data collection around health outcomes for people, what the gaps are for people, particularly Black trans women here in Austin. they're the most vulnerable community, really. Ooh, that's my dog. I'm gonna let him out. So we really wanted to see like what was happening there and what we could do as a city government to kind of help support folks who are really struggling in this community. So we did that too. What else? Oh, homelessness, very huge issue here. If displacement is an issue as a city grows rapidly, your homelessness population is really going to skyrocket as well, because it just becomes unaffordable and a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck, right? So we have a very high rate of homelessness here, and it grows every year. We also know demographic wise that over 40% of the people experiencing homelessness in Austin are Black men. But we were not prioritizing them in terms of getting them housing or access to services. And so we helped develop a new kind of prioritization matrix to really help guide organizations working in this environment to help reach folks who needed the help the most, because the way that it's currently being done, we kind of only reward the people who look the best on paper, who maybe don't have like a mental illness or who aren't supporting a family, or so it's like the harder the case, the more difficult it was for the city to reach that person or that family or that group of people. But that's not really the way that city government should work. We should be lifting up the folks who need the help the most. And then I did want to include these, and I did ask Dr. Nee to share these slides with you later. These are just some questions that we ask ourselves when we're trying to identify a problem. And we never identify a problem on our own. We try to take leadership from people who are most directly impacted by things happening in the city. But these are some of the questions we know that we ask. We want to know what the data is, first and foremost. What is it telling us that, where are the gaps? We also want to know like what the history is. Like I said several times already, it's dangerous when you operate ahistorically. Like if you don't know what has led you up to the current circumstance, it can be really dangerous, because then you can like just recreate patterns, or you can create further harm. We also want to make sure when we're talking about community that we're talking about the most directly impacted folks. Because sometimes you don't need to reach everybody. You need to reach the people who need the services or whatever it is that you're providing, who need it the most. They should be the ones that you design your program around. Yeah, accountability is a huge thing too. It should never be a one-way thing. You don't want to be paternalistic in this kind of work. Like, this is about solidarity and not charity. And what I mean by that is that it shouldn't be like this top-down model where you're like, out of the goodness of my heart, I'm giving you this. But it's really about working together to solve problems. And who are you in relationship with, and who are you accountable to at the end of the day? I think that's really important. But yeah, I went through that pretty quickly because I know I wanted us to have time to kind of talk together, answer any questions you all might have, or go over anything that I said.